So I wanted to do kind of an end of season thing here, just to kind of wrap it up, not wrap up Voyager season one, something I'll probably be doing in future seasons as well. But this one is more important. Even if I didn't do a season two video and a season three video after I did those, I would still do the season one. And there's a lot of reasons for this. First and foremost, I feel it is necessary to understand the plight of Voyager, and season one and season two both exemplify it very well. I actually sat down and did some numbers, and, well, okay, let me actually take a step back. One of the things that has been true in television since, television was invented, basically, is that the first season or the first few episodes of any given show tend to be worse than the rest. And most of the time, that's not something you hold against these people. It's something that we have come to consider to be a normality at this point in time. It is common for us to accept that the first season or the first few episodes are going to be bad. And there's lots of reasons for it, because we as intelligent individuals understand, these people are still getting a hold of their roles. The actors are still getting used to it. The directors are still getting used to the people of what they're trying to portray. The writers are still getting a handle for how they want the characters to go. And all these people have just started working together, right? So everyone's still getting their footing. So there's an understandable leniency that tends to go into that. It is also worth noting that that leniency does not always extend at the money level, for lack of a simpler way to put it. What I mean by that is the point at which the people who are actually funding the show and have the power to cancel it, a lot of shows tend to get canceled because they're not willing to give that leniency. Oftentimes, a franchise show, such as Star Trek, will be given greater leniency because it's a franchise show, because the execs assume, quite logically, admittedly, that people are going to watch it because it's Star Trek. Now, the problem with that is the accurate statement would be more like people are willing to give it a chance because it's Star Trek, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, I tend to view Star Trek in general, episodes, movies, books, whatever, in a 5-point scale, okay? Worst, bad, neutral, good, best, okay? Now, the best is the truly amazing stuff. Inner Light, Best of Both Worlds, In the Pale Moonlight, yeah, I suddenly can't think of the name of any other episodes, but there are several. And, Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 6 would be listed under best. This is what I consider to be the true hallmarks of the series, the things that remind me of why it is I love these shows so much. And, I really, really enjoy, and I've probably rewatched those episodes and movies more than I have the whole series, right? Good is also obvious. Something I genuinely enjoy, something that I want to rewatch. Something that when I'm sitting down, I will most likely actually make effort to go to that episode, even if I don't feel like watching, the whole rest of the series again. Then we have neutral. Neutral is much harder to define because it can actually apply in several circumstances. Let me give you two of the most obvious types, okay? There's an episode in season 1 of TNG called The Neutral Zone. Um, I'm going to give a little speech after this about opinion and taste, so forgive me for not covering that immediately. I probably should have said that first. Apologies. I'll get to that after I finish describing my 5 points. In the neutral zone, it is effectively 2 episodes, which are very, very poorly mashed together, okay? One is the foreshadowing for the Borg, the introduction of the Romulans for the first time in TNG, and a great deal of suspense, very excellent music, and overall an awesome little sequence. The other plot is these yokels who they pick up who were in suspended animation from the 19th century or 20th century or whatever. I'm sorry, no, that would have been 20th century, my bad. From our era, in other words. And that's bad. That's just really bad. So when I watch that episode, I tend to think of it as 2 episodes, and if I were to use the literal definitions, which I of course don't do, but by my own guidelines, it would qualify as both good and bad, which is part of why I classify this as a neutral episode. It is not an episode I will skip, even though I'll skip parts of it, and it is an episode I will genuinely enjoy and rewatch, even if only in part. That's one type of neutral episode. There are several other examples of it, but I think Neutral Zone is the best because those 2 plots are so completely unconnected to each other and so different in quality. The other type of neutral is the obvious kind. It's an episode that isn't good, it isn't bad. I have no great feeling of it. When I am rewatching a series, I will watch a neutral episode. I won't get upset at it. I won't be like, oh, this is dumb. But I also won't be like, oh my god, it's basically a general lack of reaction is the second type of definition for neutral. And I'm going to go ahead and stop there and move on to bad. Now, the problem is bad is also a little harder to define than you would imagine because there's. I try to be fair, I really do. I fail because I'm a human being, and, duh. But the initial definition of bad was an episode I will skip upon rewatching. If I'm going back through the series and if there's an episode I skip, that is a bad episode. Now, the catch is there are several episodes I will skip, not because they're bad, but because something about it pisses me off, like the episode I just covered, for example, or because there's something in there I can't bring myself to watch, like the eyeball thing in Farscape with the little chips. I don't even know the name of the episode, and I don't feel like looking it up. You know, these are not bad episodes. They're just episodes that have an element to them that bother me, so I tend to skip them. Or I tend to skip the certain scenes, you know what I mean? So I can't actually call those bad. No, bad is something that actively makes me not want to watch it, for whatever reason. And something that bothers me personally, rather than something that is a matter of taste, are two different things, if you see where I'm going with here, you know? Um, so that's bad. And then there's, of course, the fifth category, worst. There are actually very, very few aspects of very few things in all of Trek movies, books, and TV shows that I would consider to be in worst. In fact, I can name most of them by heart right now. Worst is actually the most obvious definition of all. It is so offensively bad that it. Okay, one of the things that could be said of some bad things, not in Star Trek, but in general, is the concept of so bad it's good. This is a fairly common concept, something that you know is bad, something you know is horrible, and yet you still enjoy it, right? Worst is by definition something that I cannot enjoy at all, that actively uh, takes enjoyment out of my life when I'm watching it, right? That I can't even take some kind of twisted enjoyment or say that it's so bad it's good. No, no, it's just horrible, awful, and I don't want to touch it, and I will probably never watch any of those episodes again, or movie. Except for the fact that I can't say that because no less than two episodes I consider in worst are in Voyager and are coming up relatively soonish. One of them is, anyways. And I'm going to have to rewatch it so I can do the video for it because I said I was going to. That was one of the things I decided back when I first decided I was doing these videos, was I was going to watch Threshold. Anyways, that's my 5-point system, right? Now, the opinion thing. I'm sorry, I really should have mentioned this first. One thing I've discovered over my many, many years is that Star Trek fans, whether they be Trekkers, Trekkies, or people who just watch the shows occasionally or have seen some of it, tend to have incredibly diverse opinions. It's actually one of the things I like about the franchise, believe it or not. Now, let me clarify this, okay? For those of you who are younger, or those of you who don't actually fully get my mention of this. I was a Trekker when the internet was in its infancy, right? And I'm not trying to be like, oh, I'm better than you. I'm just trying to give you some perspective, okay? When I say, okay, let me just get to my point. If you look at something in a forum, for example, this is probably the best example and the worst example at the same time. You look at some game or some video or whatever in a forum, and you see the discussions and the opinions there. I shouldn't even say discussions. You see the arguments and the opinions there. It is entirely possible that some of those people do genuinely feel the opinions they're saying. But it's almost impossible to tell how many, if you follow me. There's too many trolls. There's too many people who argue for the sake of arguing. This is a phenomenon I've noticed more nowadays than I used to because I've had more exposure to forums and stuff in the last year and a half or so. Basically, at the start of the Tor beta, to give you a specific date, than I have in the past, because I usually avoid that sort of thing for this reason. It's like sitting around in the old MIRC chats. The really bad ones, the common ones, the general ones, not the ones you and your friends set up or whatever. In my opinion, there's nothing edifying about that. And so I cannot say that there's a diversity of opinion there because I cannot state for the validity of any of the opinions there. Now, you could say that about anything, true. But statistically speaking, so much of what could be considered to be modernly diverse isn't. It's just people who are yelling to yell or arguing to argue or bringing up stupid issues because they're bored or are trolls, which can define all of the above, by the way. So, I'm talking about a genuine diversity in opinion, people who honestly think and will have reasonable discussions about things that are in complete contrast with my own opinions, with his opinions, with her opinions. We all tend and we used to get in these massive discussions, not arguments, but like genuine debates at conventions, for example. Yes, I used to go to Star Trek conventions. You may brand me a geek if you want. I wear it well. And we would have long, in-depth discussions about things that we disagreed on. We weren't yelling, and we weren't calling the other person stupid. We were just talking about it because it was fascinating. And many of the people I encountered also felt it was fascinating to see someone who had such a different opinion and could explain it. As opposed to, oh, you're lame. They would actually say, well, I think blah, 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 and could actually give reasoning for it. And it was interesting. Apologies for going off on this rant, but I just wanted to make my point clear here. When I say Star Trek fans have a diverse opinion, I really do mean it. I have heard so many different opinions. I've heard people defend everything and done so well. I've heard people vilify some of my favorite episodes and done so well. I have heard so many different opinions across the Star Trek, and there's so much to look at. I mean, Star Trek is not exactly one solid block of gray, is it? It's diverse itself. My point in all of this is everything that I've been saying, and this should go without saying, but I have to mention this, is in my opinion, and everything I'm about to talk about is in my opinion. There are a couple of facts I'm going to toss out at you, but most of this is just coming from my own perspective, right? Now that all that's out of the way, let's talk about the season 1 phenomenon. One of the things that Trek fans in general have become accustomed to is the idea that the first season of any given Star Trek is bad. Season 1 of TNG is rather infamous for being bad, right? And I myself had a general negative opinion of it. Rather recently, I started rewatching TNG. I actually ended up stopping so I could do these Voyager videos instead. But I managed to get up to season 3. I was rewatching TNG, and I was amazed at how not bad it was. The first few episodes were bad. In fact, TNG also contains the only worst episode in a season 1 of the lists I'm about to go through here. But there was a surprisingly small amount of bad, all things considered. Most of it was pretty much the first few episodes. And I realized that one of the things I had been mentally doing is associating several of these episodes not with season 1. Here's one little fact for you here. Season 1 of TNG, okay, counting all two-parters as one episode. That's very important before anybody else out there gets nitpicky on me. Counting Encounter Farpoint is one episode. Counting, Emissary is one episode. There are 25 episodes in Season 1 of TNG. Now that's huge, all things considered. DS9, by contrast, had 19. Enterprise had 26, surprisingly. Voyager had 15. But TNG had quite a few episodes, and without really meaning to, I had sort of associated many of them with later seasons because I actually liked them. And upon rewatching, I was surprised by how not bad it was. I mean, obviously there was still a horribleness, but you get my point, right? And so I started going, yeah. And I started glancing through DS9, and when I was doing this for Voyager, I decided to compare the four, actually, because I'm going to include Enterprise on this kind of as a joke. I looked down the Enterprise list of Season 1 episodes, and I found 100% of them to be bad or neutral at best. I really, really don't like Season 1 of Enterprise at all. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, personally. Although I have heard a few people, not very many, in all honesty, but a few people who have said that they enjoy Season 1 Enterprise. You know what? That's great. Again, that's that diversity of opinion thing. But I'm just including that kind of as a joke. That's the last fact I'm going to even include Enterprise in. So let's move on. In TNG, in my opinion, the first season consisted of one worst episode. I bet some of you out there can guess which one it is. 7 bads, 9 neutrals, and 8 goods. In other words, there were a grand total of 17 episodes amongst 26 that I actually enjoyed watching, or at the very least didn't unenjoy. I was like, okay. That's actually rather impressive, all things considered, and rather surprising looking back at it. For reference, the total percentage of good episodes is 32%, which is not bad for a Season 1. I looked at DS9, because I figured surely DS9 would be fantastic, but then I remembered something. I actually didn't like DS9 when it came out. Believe it or not, I watched the first few episodes, and I saw bad episodes, and I had less tolerance back then. And so I dropped the series until whenever Worf joined the show, season 3 or 4, I forget which. But I just didn't watch it because it didn't catch me. But anyways, going back, DS9 had 8 bad, which is more if you're keeping track, 4 neutral, and 6 good, which is also less good. I will, however, get it credit because DS9 also has 1 best in it. And I bet you can guess which one that one is, too. But anyways, the point is, both of these seasons didn't really turn out the way I expected it. When I consider season one TNG, I have to say past tense now. My knee-jerk reaction was, ugh. When I consider season anything of DS9, my knee-jerk reaction was, yeah. And the two leveled out quite a bit in the middle of this. I'm bringing all of this up to highlight Voyager and season one. In my opinion, there were 4 good episodes, 1 bad episode, and 10 neutral. A huge chunk, especially percentage-wise, considering, again, 15 episodes total. Now, everything about that explains Voyager in a nutshell, and it's both its predicament and it's the thing that ended up working in its favor. You see, when Voyager was coming out, there was a great deal of understanding about the season one rule, not just about television, but about Trek. This is our fourth, technically, Star Trek. And you'll notice I didn't count original series because that was a different time and under different circumstances, and it only had 3 seasons total, so I'm not really counting that. But this was not our first Trek. This was not our first time through here. We were expecting it to be awful. Now I know several people looked at Voyager and thought it was awful, thought it was a terrible show, and wanted nothing to do with it. And of course, that's fine. But a lot of people I know, myself included, looked at it and were just like, okay. And 2 big facts came out. One, almost no bad episodes. 1 bad episode, in my opinion, in the whole of season one. Some decent good episodes, which actually I really enjoyed, and quite a few neutrals, which I actually found to be more positive than I thought I would upon this reviewing for these videos. So, my point is, overall, it was very much a net positive. It was, okay, I'm with it. That's point one. Point two is actually just as important. There was a great deal of potential in display. This was still season one. We didn't get how Voyager would end up working for its bad parts, which is basically well, I'll get to that later. We didn't get the fact that continuity was something that they were trying to avoid all that much yet. There were a few examples of it, of course, but not that many. And overall, there was so much potential on board that we were like, okay, if this is their season one, their season two is going to be amazing, So this is one of the reasons Voyager succeeded at its first season. They had so few episodes for the usual reasons, the money concerns, the execs, whatever you want to call it. And it was successful enough, more than successful enough, to greenlight the second season. I'm going to mention one other thing before I start talking about the second season. That is the fact that of all the Star Treks, including the original series, well, that's a lie. Fling the original series out the window. Okay. In the case of this discussion, all the Star Treks, including Enterprise, Voyager, DS9, and TNG, all of them, it took the actors, directors, everything I talked about earlier, quite a while to figure out their characters. In fact, let's point to DS9 as a great example of this. Now, I like DS9. I think it's a great show. But Bashir was awful, especially in season one. You know what I mean? I'm sure many of you out there are just kind of nodding your heads, yeah, because they had no idea what they were doing with him. He had no planned character arc. He had nothing interesting about him. He was just a medical guy, because there was always a medical guy, In season one of TNG, we had, and I can't believe I'm saying this, Picard and Data, arguably the 2 main characters of TNG, were both aggravating, irritating, and annoying. Picard was a stuck-up prick half the time, and Data was just irritating to the point of wanting to slug him, These people, I'm not blaming anyone, by the way. This is just how it is. This is growing pains. Actors getting used to the roles, writers getting used to the characters, directors getting used to the people. It's normal, okay? What I'm saying is that of these 4, and Enterprise, I'm not even going to talk about. Hang on, let me throw up a little bit. Okay, I feel a little better. All right. I'm sorry, I would like to think I've made my opinion on Enterprise very clear, which I probably haven't, but because there is actually a twist there. But I'm not going to discuss that here, because we're talking about Voyager. My point is that season 1 of Voyager, all those growing pains only lasted like 2 episodes. Seriously. All the actors got into their roles very quickly. All the creative people who were producing it were the same people in TNG. They were very accustomed to doing this kind of show and this formatting. So they knew what they were doing pretty much immediately. Most of the directors were long-term directors. LeVar Burton comes immediately to mind, someone who was an extremely accomplished director, has won awards for it and everything, My point is, everything kind of came together very quickly for Voyager, all things considered. While it wasn't amazing like it could have been, and should have been, everyone fit into their roles very quickly. And it flowed a lot more smoothly. While there were still some problems with the writing, especially with regard to certain characters, Janeway, The fact of the matter is that overall everyone slipped in kind of to a nice comfortable pair of boots, you know what I mean? And it is probably helped by that by no less than four of those actors were veteran actors, two of which were theatrical actors prior to this. And so I'm of course referring to Tim Russ, Mulgrew, Picardo, and Harris. Or no, McNeil. I'm sorry, McNeil is his name. I always confuse his name. These four actors and actress, I should say, these four people were, you could tell almost immediately. They just kind of walked right into the role. There was a couple of growing pains in Caretaker. They were still trying to get used to the role in Parallax, and then boom, they're good. By the time and again hit around, they had already basically hit their character strides, and for good and for bad. It really helped elevate the show in the general public opinion, and so Voyager was off to a good start. Much better start than DS9, which for the first several seasons was under extremely severe threat of cancellation, believe it or not. Now, Voyager itself was also almost cancelled, and it was almost cancelled because of Season 2. Really, it all could boil down to that. Season 1 did well enough to greenlight continuing. It was kept going. They hadn't quite, I don't remember the specific number, so forgive me, but at this point in time, they weren't set for the 7-season contract yet. They weren't ready for that. Season 2 came around and the show, well, I've tried to be net positive and try to have an enthusiastic outlook on these videos, on all videos I do. I'm going to be most challenged in that in Season 2 Voyager, because Season 2 Voyager is awful. There are so many bad episodes in Season 2, and there's a worst, as I've already told you, one of the worst elements of Star Trek I've ever seen. And I'm actually kind of dreading it, to be honest with you, because I'm not sure what to do with it exactly. I mean, you know what I mean? But my reason for bringing that up here is it's relevant to the plight of Voyager. And ironically, again, one of its strong suits, because after Season 2, a lot of the creative people switched around behind the scenes. I used to know names, and of course I'm very bad at remembering names, but several individuals switched places. Certain people started taking over creative control of the show. The creative producer, creative director, the people who are actually in charge of the overall viewpoint and trying to set down the creative control, really. I don't know what else to say to that. The role I would want if I was doing a TV show, along with director and writer, but that's just me being selfish. Anyways, point being, all those people behind the scenes, including several of the directors and several of the writers, all kind of swapped around, and they got 7 of 9 onto the show at the end of Season 3, which was probably the point at which it really started to hit its stride. But my point is, if it wasn't for that change of the guard, Voyager would almost, I guarantee you, have been canceled, especially after how badly Season 2 bombed. And the only reason they got through Season 3 was they kept telling the money people, give us a little time. And I think this was a correct thing for them to do. They could have immediately after Basics, Season 3, Episode 2, they could have immediately started off with the Borg plot, which was what was being pushed for. And I strongly agree that doing so would have been a bad thing, from a creative perspective and from a monetary perspective. They needed to build up to that. Now, there were some bad episodes in Season 3, I think. I don't have to remember off the top. But there were also some rather good ones in Season 3. And the show tended to do a bit of an upslide leading up to Scorpion, which many people consider to be the high point of the whole series. And then, from that point on, the show started to hit its stride, as has been said before, for better and worse. So I mention all this to just kind of get some background information and the whole thing. Now, obviously, there's another title to this video, and that is Archie and Gaia's Voyager. Excuse me. I have heard a great number of logical and reasonable criticisms and complaints about the storyline I have been weaving behind the scenes in my changes section, especially now that I've decided to make it one contiguous canon. I'd like to address those here, if I may, to the best of my ability. First of all, I have heard 2, I believe, comments from people who basically said, "Why do you keep defaulting to this political thing?" And for those of you who don't know what I mean, I'm talking politics in the Final Fantasy XII sense, not politics in the Senate room floor sense. Real politics, as I like to call it. Why do I keep defaulting to that kind of story? I freely admit that many of my stories tend to have that kind of background and backdrop to them, because that's kind of the way I think, if you know what I mean. And I tend to enjoy those kind of stories, and that's just my flaw as a writer, if you know what I mean. So, which is funny, because actually the only 2 books I've ever written in my life are completely non-political. There's no politics going on whatsoever. But anyways, it's just kind of something I kind of lean towards these days, right? And so I do apologize if that's not your thing. I understand completely, and I try very hard not to make it always about the politics, as I've tried to emphasize in my last few videos, especially faces and the episode I still can't think of its name. Learning curve. That was it. Learning curve. Damn episode. Anyways, I really don't have anything else to add here. It is something I tend to lean towards in general because that's what I tend to like. I mean, I did like Babylon 5 as one of my favorite shows of all time, after all. Next point. I have had several people discuss how they feel that the Conclave is too much of an aping of the Dominion, and I can certainly see why they would say that. I would like to address this on two separate points, if I may. Three, actually. I'm sorry. First, which is the third, there was no intention for aping the Dominion. While of course I like DS9, the Dominion was not my motivation, my logical reasoning, my source of inspiration, whatever you want to call it. I wasn't even thinking about the Dominion until after I'd already started fleshing out the Conclave story much more. Second point. One of the big things has been I have been telling you guys, the viewers, a little bit more than you would be actually hearing if you were watching the episode. I've been giving you more background just to explain certain things, right? Most of this is info that would either be given more piecemeal or would be not mentioned at all. And in fact, if my count is not incorrect, the total number of times in all of Season 1 that the Conclave would be mentioned at all is in fact 3. And 2 of those were literally at askance, and one of them was more, more in depth, more talking about what they are. All 3 of these were negative, but that is on purpose, which brings me to my last point. Um, Basically, I'm kind of asking you to go with me on this, if you know what I mean. I do have an intended arc for the Conclave. I don't want to say it here because that would ruin the point. At this point, I might as well not do the changes section. I might as well just say, okay, here's my Voyager and do a video about that. Which, yes, I could do, but I'd rather do this in the former method if that is okay with you. Especially because it's more creatively interesting for me, and hopefully more entertaining for you. I have no idea. But the point is, I kind of feel bad, to be honest with you, because I feel like I'm selling you short, and this is a problem I have with GMing too. Ensuring that your players trust you isn't so you can betray that trust. It isn't so that you can stab them in the back better. At least not for me. It is so that I have more tools at my disposal. I can't get away with certain things with a party that doesn't trust me. Let me give you a perfect example of this. The Shadow Room. For those of you who've been watching my D&D blog, the Shadow Room that they encountered in the research facility deep within Visayan, if my players didn't trust me, they wouldn't have touched that. In fact, one of my players was talking to one of his friends, who is a D&D gamer as well, not a part of my game, just a different game. And her response was basically, there is no way in hell I would have done anything with that Shadow Room. I would have looked at that and said, nope, because to a normal D&D gamer who doesn't know my style, who I do not have their trust, that looks like, walk in here to die. Lose your character here and start re-rolling now, that kind of thing. It's got a big neon sign over it. But that's not my style. And my gamers know this now, and I had to earn that trust, and now that I have it, I can do more, like the Shadow Room, like the fact that I can have boss mechanics where someone seems to die in the middle of it and they won't immediately call me out on it, that I can have a starting setup that even though they question, they will eventually at least accept. And, all of this, there's so many things and tools that I'm allowed as a GM, as a writer, as a storyteller, because my audience trusts me. Now, of course, that puts a great deal of weight upon me, of responsibility. I have to live up to that trust, and I do try to do so to the best of my extent. But that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Now, I know you guys have no reason to trust me, and that's fine. I understand. You haven't read anything I've written because I don't like other people rating it. I feel too ashamed about it, to be a little bit honest with you. But, you know, ashamed isn't the right word. Embarrassed is a better word. But the point is that I am kind of going somewhere with this story, and I would like to keep going that way. And so if you guys want to keep criticizing, that is actually fine, and I will continue to read your criticisms, and I'll continue to take them into effect. But all I'm going to say right now, in kind of a foreshadowy way, is that there is a reason that there is an organization called the Conclave, which is massive beyond all measure, and has gone to extreme lengths in order to force other organizations to be a part of it, through military conquest, which actually hasn't happened yet. None of the conquests they've taken have actually been militarily conquered. Through political pressure, through economic reforms, through diplomatic means, whatever means. They have been expanding at all costs. And in fact, if you look at the map here, right, here's the general path of Voyager, starting up here, going down here, and this is conclave space. It's been expanding this way for quite some time, and rather rapidly for all intents and purposes. There's a reason behind that. And I'd also like to point out that one other thing, I'm sorry, is most of the story, especially for the beginning portion of season 2, is going to be more about the Alliance and the Terranok, and well, same thing, the Terranok Alliance and what they're doing, and as well as Seska and what she's doing with regards there too. Because all we've done is hint at the Conclave. We have actually encountered the Alliance on more than one occasion. The Conclave is kind of a background to their story, and I like that type of storytelling, admittedly. I like the story that escalates because there's this, but you find out this is happening because of this, but we find out this is happening because of this, right? And you grow naturally. It escalates and grows as you go through the story, and I do like that type of storytelling. And I guess that's it. That's all I got in my defense. I'm sorry, guys. If you still don't like it, I got nothing. Um, Gosh, this is longer than I intended it to be, but either way, I'm gonna go ahead and rest my throat, and then I will talk to you guys on the other side.